Okay, it is 11 o'clock, I think, on the dot, so we will make a start. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy, if we haven't met before, and I'd like to welcome you today to this Church Urban Fund webinar. It is called Getting to Know Your Community Better. So thank you very much for being here today. We really hope this hour we're going to spend together this morning will be helpful to you and your church in some way. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping for us. This session is being recorded, but please note that your faces won't be visible on the recording. We'll be sending the recording to you afterwards, and we'll put it on our website so you can direct people to it who couldn't make it today. You should also be able to see somewhere on your screen a little Q&A button where you can post questions as we go along. So if you think of anything as we're going through, just pop your questions in there, and then we're going to have some time at the end to pick those up and answer them. So this morning, what we want to do is to give you the tools to help you to get to know your community better. So that is to understand your community so you can be better placed to know how to interact with it and serve it. So luckily, we have created a course that does just that. It's called Know Your Church, Know Your Neighbourhood. And we're going to take a look at that this morning over the next hour together. So this is what we're going to do. Firstly, we're going to take a look at what Know Your Church, Know Your Neighbourhood is. So that's the acronym there that we use because it's quite a long title to write down every single time. So you'll see that pop up throughout today. So we'll look at what it is and what it aims to do. Then, thankfully, you'll hear from someone that isn't me. You'll hear from Simon. Simon's going to have a look at what is in the course, what's contained in the course. Then we're going to hear from David, who is from a church who's currently going through the Know Your Church, Know Your Neighbourhood course. Then Wendy is going to share some tips gathered from various churches who have undertaken the process on how to make the course as effective as possible, to make sure it really makes a difference and ultimately doesn't end up being any kind of waste of anyone's time or resources. And then finally, as I said, we'll have some time for Q&A. We'll answer any questions that you have about the course. So please add them as we go along. If you can find the Q&A button. If you can't add them to the chat, that's fine as well. So what is Know Your Church, Know Your Neighbourhood? It is a free, that's key, it's free, facilitated process that helps you as a church to think about yourself in relation to your community. So it's designed to help you make prayerful and informed decisions about your mission in your community. The process was actually designed and piloted by the Anglican Diocese of Birmingham as part of a pastoral skills module. Then it was adapted by a Together Network core member, Thrive Together Birmingham, and other Together Network members around the country. If you don't know, the Together Network, we're a network of Christian organisations nationally convened by the Church Urban Fund. So it's designed for a small group of church members. It gives them specific tools to reflect on how your church is seen by others, to listen to the wider community, celebrate its strengths, and have a deeper understanding of its needs. You then go on to share your findings with the wider congregation and then make those prayerful and intentional decisions together about how you want to respond and take action. Another key thing about the course is that it's adaptable to the needs of your church. So you can just do parts of it and go at your own pace, but it usually consists of 5 sessions, each of 2 hours, delivered over a 6-month period. And there's also some tasks for the group to do in between those sessions as well. So while the course can be adapted, the core aims of the process always remain the same, and those are these ones on the right-hand side here. So as a result of taking part in Know Your Church, Know Your Neighbourhood, these are the things that we'd really want your church to do by the end. So develop a vision for your neighbourhood. So as you begin to think about what a flourishing neighbourhood might look like, and how God might be seen in it. The second one is we'd want you to understand the place of your church within the community as you think about and collect information on how your church looks, feels, and interacts with people outside of the church. The next one there is learn about your local neighbourhood. So finding out more about its strengths and needs through a process of collecting data and listening to local people and organisations. And finally, most importantly, developing an active response as you prayerfully reflect on what you've learned. Okay, so that's a high level overview, but what does the course actually contain? For this, I'm going to hand over to Simon. So Simon is Chief Officer at Transforming Knots Together.
Well, thank you, Amy. As you say, I'm the Chief Officer at Transforming Knots Together, which is one of these Together networks across the country. I work on that part-time. I'm also a parish priest, and I work in a multi-parish benefice in inner city Derby. So I know something of the struggle of running a local church. I know some of the challenges that come with working with a group of keen people who really just want to do something in my church. But how do we connect to our community? How do we have a chance just to unpack exactly how we connect to our community? And there's so many of those off-the-peg solutions that you can go out to, and so many packages that you could pick up off the internet. They're all meant to offer some sort of silver bullet to sorting out the mission of your local church and really get your congregation motivated to do mission. Sadly, in my experience, none of them fully succeed, and often we end up having a feeling of a certain degree of disillusionment. So what's the difference with this Know Your Church, Know Your Neighbourhood course? Why is this one that we want to talk about? And what's the difference? And why do I feel really passionate about it? You can probably tell from my voice that I really enjoy this course. Well, I don't promise that silver bullet. It's not the course that will sort it all out. But I have found it to be one of the most integrated and holistic approaches. It really takes time to listen to God, time to listen to our context, time to listen to our church. And it doesn't actually offer solutions. Rather, it offers a framework, which in those immortal words of Rowan Williams, to discover what God is doing and to join in. So as Amy's asked me to do, let me just unpack the course in a bit more detail. So if we go on to the second slide or third slide. So session 1 involves us exploring what is actually God's vision of flourishing. What does flourishing mean for God? But we actually start by asking, what makes our hearts sing? What makes us feel at peace? And if we're made in God's image, in some ways, we will reflect what's on God's heart. But then we go a bit deeper, we unpack some of the scriptures, and we understand what is it that makes God's heart sing for his neighbourhood, for this place. Starting with God, rather than asking him to bless our human efforts, always seems a good place to start for me. And between these sessions is when the really important work takes place. This is what's different about this course. It's not passive. You don't just turn up for 5 sessions and just hope the best that you can wing it when you get there. It really does involve work. In fact, I'd say hard work between the sessions if you're going to get the best out of it. And so the first task that you do between session 1 and 2 is you go for a prayer walk. You walk your patch, what we Anglicans call the parish. We ask God to let us see our community through his eyes. Now, don't worry if that's new to you, that's something strange to you, not done that before. There is teaching in the session by your facilitator and in the participant guide on what it means to do a prayer walk and what that involves, and some of the practical skills on putting it together. But it's a really good way to start with an extensive time of prayer, out and about in your neighbourhood, and discovering what's happening in your neighbourhood through prayer. And it all starts with prayer. Next slide, please, as they say in the COVID time. So session 2 is the church in and for community. And for me, the key reading from the Bible here, which starts this session off, is a reading from the feeding of the 5,000. And it faced with the enormity of the crowds, 5,000 men, yes, but what about the women and children? Yes, probably closer to 10,000. The overwhelming nature of the crowd. Jesus asks a simple question of his disciples. What have you got in your hand? What do we start with? What have we got that we can utilize to start? And there's an approach to community development that I really like, that I've explored and done some study on over the last year or two, called asset-based community development, ABCD. We love acronyms. This starts not with what are the needs of our community and how can we go and fix it. It starts with what are the assets that we have that we can offer to work with others to build one another up together. So to start off, what have we got? 5 loaves and 2 fish. Well, in this particular case, it's not the loaves and the fishes, is it? We've got a church building, or have we? Have we got a church hall? Is it appropriate? What are the activities that we currently do? How do people see those activities? How we are perceived by our community? What connection have we got to our community already? What are the existing, already made pathways into our community? Scouts, the guides, the drop-in coffee morning, the warm place, the place of welcome. We could do that perhaps in the session, and we work that through in the session together, and we map it with lots of interactive ways of doing it, using photographs and cuttings. But one of the things that we don't already know in many cases are what are the existing skills, what are the existing connections that our congregation have when they turn up on a Sunday? What do they actually know and what's happening already? So the homework is go and ask them. Go and ask our congregation and do a survey and unpack the hidden assets that are already at play in our church. Next slide, please. So session 3, we're reflecting on our learning. We look back on the results of that congregational survey. And it's at this session I tend to find that we really do get down to business. It's this one where the juices start to get going and people start getting animated. And by looking at the results of the congregational survey, we do the first part of what it says on the tin, know your church. We look at our existing mission and we begin to see where the gaps are. And we begin to understand about what some of the opportunities may be emerging. But then we go on to knowing your neighbourhood. And this is probably one of the most participative part of the programme. It's very participative anyway, which Wendy will tell you about in a few moments. But at this point, we gather around a map and we literally get the marker pens out and start marking the map where the local schools, where the local shops, the takeaway, the leisure centre, the community centre, the health service, the doctor's surgery, where the old people's homes, where are the places where people with disability may gather, where the existing voluntary sector groups, where the existing community organisations, the Scout Hub, where's the business sits, where's the industry, do you have large companies, do you have small companies, where are the parks, where's the play areas, where do people play sport, where's the police station, the fire station, where's the local council services provided? And we go even detail into what type of housing is there. What is it? Is it terrace housing? Is it small housing? Is it larger detached houses? Are they owned by occupiers? Are they privately rented? Is it local authority? Is it housing association? And then we mark in a big long line through the routes of the local bus service, or maybe you haven't got a bus service, but where are the buses? Where are the transport arrangements? And of course, we can't forget other places of worship. Where are there other places where people gather for worship? It's quite a fun session and we get lots done and we begin to get a bigger picture of knowing your neighbourhood. But there's more information that perhaps we haven't got in the room on that evening. And so the homework is go online, The census has just been produced, the results of the 2021 census, and Church Open Fund and others have done some really good profiles of parishes, and we drill down on things that we haven't been able to get from the map. What are the working age of people? What is the nature of their work? What is the ethnic profile? What is even nowadays got sexual orientation profile? There's whole and religious background. All those things are on the census. So we will research what's actually taking place, and we can find by going online. And we might ask ourselves, what are the voluntary sector group that's meeting down the road? Have they got some online information that helps us to know what's happening in the area? Have they already done an assessment of the area and their description of the area? So it's an online exercise. People find that a less strenuous piece of homework than the congregational survey, which is probably a bigger piece of work. And there's a breather sigh of relief that they haven't got quite such a big piece of work to do when they go home that week. But the knowledge base is growing. On to the next slide. And on to session 4. So by session 4, when we've arrived there and we've got all our information, and we've got our online information, the maps that we have in front of us. We know your church. We know your neighbourhood. We've seen the places of connection. Ideas are beginning to emerge. We found who our people are. We found what our skills are. Let's get going. Let's start. No, there's another step yet. We may know our neighbourhood, but we only know it on paper. We don't actually really know what's going on. And the danger is we turn into Superman or Wonder Woman and we fly into the neighbourhood and we want to save the day. But like the congregational survey, we need to get out and know the people and find out what's really happening. So this session is about equipping our team members to do something that they're slightly nervous about, which is about going out and asking the local community, and particularly local, what we call stakeholders these days, but key players like the police service or the councillor or the voluntary sector leads or the doctor or key people in the local area, head teachers, find out from them exactly what's going on. Go and talk to them. And it's a bit anxious there, so we give practical skills are given to help you to explore how to do that, and what survey questions might be we put together in that session. But by the time we got to this point, the confidence level, it has increased. We've already done the congregational survey, we've done the mapping. There's a certain degree of know-how within the group that is actually ready to go and wants to engage. And the homework, go and do it. Go and speak to people who work in our neighbourhoods and for our local organisations. Find out their existing links with the church. We strengthen those links. Are there links that we could make? Are there places where we could make new partnerships? And where do we have no contact? Where are the gaps? Where are the spaces? Next slide, please. So session 5 is reflecting on all we have learned. I think you can tell now why we say it takes 6 months over this course. It is a substantial piece of work. But I really do think it can make a major difference in the way we do mission. And dare I say, even the way we do church in our neighbourhoods. So session 5 brings together all those different threads. It brings together all those different themes that we've been exploring together and all that different learning, and gives us a chance just to see where God is pointing us to. What are our strengths that we're going to build on? What's happening already? Where are the chances we can work with others in those good conversations we've had with our local community, rather than try to do it all by ourselves? And maybe God is pointing to us to some gaps that we maybe be called to. And the final task is to draw up a report to present back to the church leadership. In some cases, the small little group that you've pulled together might have only been 1 or 2 representatives of the church leadership. And so go back to the PCC if you're an Anglican or diaconate or the elders. Go back to the wider congregation when you've consulted them and set out some significant points that you feel that you want to take forward. And so this session is putting together that report on, yes, this is where we want to go. This is where we think we should be going next, and give us some action points. So I hope you can see from that that the course is very, very interactive. It's very much designed to enable us to learn as we go along together. And in a few moments, Wendy's going to talk about some practical tips on how we do that. But I hope David's on the line. He's not on the screen at the moment. I hope he's going to be put on the screen, I hope, by our team. David comes from a church that's currently working with me on a course that I'm currently facilitating. Can you just introduce yourself, who you are, where you come from?
Hello, yeah, I'm David. I am a member of the Parochial Church Council of Holyrood Church in Edwalton, which was a village on the southern edge of Nottingham. I say it was because up to about 100 years ago, we were a tiny little village with a few hundred people. But in the course of the 20th century, the housing development spread out from Nottingham and steadily engulfed the areas between ourselves and Nottingham. So we don't really see ourselves entirely separate now. It's we are basically a suburb almost of Nottingham. And during that time, we've grown not just from a few hundred people. During the 20th century, we grew to a population of about 3,000 or 4,000 people. And in the last decade, we have had the benefit of another big housing development, which means we now have another 3,000 people living in still being built houses. So we have everything from an 850-year-old church and a village that is that age through to modern new housing, which is just being built. So it's a very diverse population within our parish. And that is the basic fundamental issue which we are caused to address as we think about what is God's mission in this area, in this very diverse area that we now have, and how do we respond to it? And how do we become his head, his hands, his eyes, his heart in this area?
That's great. Thanks, David. And so you come across this course. Why did you choose to do this particular course? Okay, well, it did actually come up in response to a specific question. We have a church hall, which was built in the mid-1950s, 60s, and it's got somewhat limited life. And we've got to decide what to do with it. And so it was a rather specific question as, what do we do with this church hall? And there were lots of possibilities were spread around about, do we invest a lot of money in trying to upgrade it, or is it past that? Do we need to knock it down and build something new? And if so, where? And this prompted not only a specific question about what could we do in terms of bricks and mortar, but the more general question of what is actually really needed in this changing area and environment. How do we, and so it took us back to saying, how well do we know this area where our church is? How much have we become introspective, looking in on ourselves, and how much are we still managing to be looking outward? And if we do look outward with purpose, then what is our ministry going to look like going forward for the next 2 or 3 decades? And what facilities do we really need in order to support that ministry? So it's a broader question than just how many bricks and mortar do we want. It is much more how well are we engaged with this community? How do we support this ministry as the church in this area? That's great. And so you invited myself and the diocesan church to come down, and we had a little chat together, and we chose to do this course. Yes,
I think we met with you first in about February of this year, and we decided fairly quickly that this particular course was the right one. Know your church, know your neighbourhood, and so we actually embarked on it in about March of this year. And Simon, you were very positive and encouraging of us, and we have been able to use you as our facilitator, enabler, encourager, whatever you care to call it, running the sessions for us and taking us forward. So at this point in time, we have done session 1. We are, if you like, we've met for session 2. We're in the middle of our homework for session 2, which is our congregational survey, which we launched a couple of weeks ago. and we are busy trying to gather the information. I know we've had some responses. We haven't yet got round to analysing them yet, but we're still pushing them out and trying to persuade our congregation to fill them in as much as possible, and just encouraging them in the process. And in that course, we're also letting them know that it's going on, because our core group of half a dozen people, we meet from time to time, we know what's going on, but the rest of the congregation and the rest of the community aren't yet up to speed with all of that. So there is an education going on at the same time.
And just tell us about the group that you've called together. It's PCC members or?
Yes, our group is, I think, 8 people. We have our clergy are with us. We have some others who are members of our church council, and we have some others who are in the congregation but not in the church council, and we have some who are more involved in the community. We are 1 or 2 in that. And so it's from that point of view, I think it's a very encouraging spread of interests that come together in our core group. So that's a good starting point, we feel. And,
absolutely, it's been really good to start together. We've got the food bank leader, we've got the youth worker,
yes.
We've got the so it's not just the church council.
No, I think there are 2 clergy and 2 from the church council, and then the others are not church council, but they are congregation or community, and as you say, people involved with our local food bank and so on. So and now we have an elected councillor who got elected last week.
got in.
But yes, so we got a broad brush of people, and yes, we are following the course. In our first sessions, we looked at, as you said, what is God prompting us to do in this area? What is God sort of helping us and encouraging us to do? And then the prayer walks, which we did in our homework after the first session, were very interesting and very revealing to many of us, because it's very easy to look at a parish and say, oh yeah, this is a parish of 5,000-6,000 people and it's all fairly affluent. We're a suburb of Nottingham. But actually, when you start to dig down, to drill down, you realize there's a tremendous heterogeneity in particularly the housing, but and probably also in the affluence, relative affluence of the people. We go from what we used to call council housing, which was built in the 1950s, right through to some £1 million plus near palaces with big gates on the outside. And so how is God, we were prompted as we walked to say, how is God expecting us to integrate, to engage with people at such extreme ends, if you like, within our parish, and even within what we see as the new housing development. Those of us who live elsewhere think of it just as one big agglomeration of houses, but those who live on that estate say, no, it's not. It has got its own heterogeneity. It's got areas of social housing, it's got areas of bigger housing, it's got different active, it is heterogeneous. So we got to recognize that in the end, we're dealing with quite a wide range of different people, different expectations, different different lifestyles.
It feels like a mosaic, doesn't it? We were talking about this the other day. We've got the pieces, we're just trying to put them together in this bigger picture.
I think that idea of a mosaic is a lovely one, because ultimately, if you stand back far enough, like these jigsaw puzzles, you can eventually see God in the middle as the main theme of this mosaic, all made up of all these little bits and pieces. The body of Christ, I think, comes to mind.
Sounds good to me. And so we're only halfway through, almost, or third way through. But have you got a sense of excitement about the future for this and where you think it might take you? Is it doing what you want it to do?
Yes, I think it's a mixture. There is excitement. I think we've made some good start, but there's some trepidation as well. I think looking ahead, I think we've done the easy bit. And I suspect that some of the latter bits are going, well, certainly they look quite challenging from where we are now. I know you were encouraging a few moments ago and saying, by the time you get there, you will have actually developed the skills to do these things. But yeah, I'm hoping that you are right. Yes, but yeah, we are. There's a lot to be done. It's very encouraging. The more we do it, the more I feel we're going in the right direction. I think, yes, but there are some quite critical stages, as we can see. Firstly, bringing all the information together, and secondly, engaging with the rest, outside our group. Firstly with the congregation, secondly with the wider community. How do we actually move forward? And that's, those are still at this point unanswered questions. But if we don't step out in faith and hope and expectation, we won't go anywhere.
Absolutely. So thank you, David. I think for me, as I said right at the very beginning, my bit, before I hand back to Amy, is the good thing about this course is it takes you through each of those steps in turn. It doesn't just dump you in the deep end. It helps to build the picture over time. And you've just really eloquently described that for us, David. Thank you for your time. I don't know if David's going to stay on our panel, but certainly I hope you can stay in with us and contribute to the conversation as we go forward.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'm handing over back to Amy. Oh, I think he's going to hand over to Wendy.
I am indeed. Thank you so much, David, for sharing all of that with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Simon, for chatting us through the course and what it contains. Yes, I'm going to hand over to Wendy now. Wendy is Community Missioner. I believe that's your title at the moment, Wendy, at Transforming Lives Together in Chester. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Wendy, and move us on to the next slide.
Okay, so thanks, Amy, and thanks, Simon and David, for giving a really thorough overview of the course, the training. Yeah, I'm Wendy from Transforming Lives Together, which operates across the Diocese of Chester, and we also work in partnership with Chester Cathedral, and we're another one of the members of the Together Network, which is run by the Church Urban Fund. So Simon and I are colleagues. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the practicalities of running the course today, because these things help it to run smoothly and to be a bit more effective at the end. So I'm sure Simon and David will have other things to contribute as well. But I've delivered the Know Your Church, Know Your Neighbourhood training 3 times to 3 separate churches. And these are the things that I learned really helped it to go well. And if you don't have all of these things, sometimes it makes it a bit more difficult to make the course effective. So it is common sense, a lot of it. So if you're already delivering training or you've done this sort of thing before, I'm sure you'll be familiar with these hints and tips, but I found them really helpful. So the first thing is, sorry, someone's just trying to leave a message on my phone. The first thing is group size. I suggest that you start with a group size of between about 8 and 10. Probably because if you have a smaller size group than that, and people can't come, you're left with 3 or 4 people, which isn't a great size for a discussion. And if you have a lot more than that, it becomes a bit unmanageable. So I found that that's quite a good size. And I would really encourage whoever you're inviting along to commit to the whole thing, the whole 5 sessions, because sometimes people get the impression they can dip in and out. And as you've heard, each session is quite important and it all contributes a lot towards the end result. So just encourage people to come along to all of them if they can. Obviously, sometimes people are not well or they've got holidays booked or something. The second thing is, I would advise, if you can, to get the church leader to attend if possible, only because in a lot of denominations, it's a church leader that leads on the decision making at the end of the course. So and it's good to have them on board. Sometimes a congregation can get more behind something if they feel the church leader's attending it, because they feel that the church leader's backing it. So I think all the 3 courses I delivered, the church leader was there, and that did help. It's not always possible, but I think it really does help in the end. Who do you invite to come along? As you heard from David and Simon, they've got a real good mixture on their course. And I think that's really important, to get a good mix of values and attitudes and experiences of the people that are attending, because they're all input different things and you can learn from each other and share things. So there's different ways of doing it. If you've got a small church leadership, you can do it with, and you think that that reflects well the mixture of your congregation, and fine, just do it with the church leadership team. You can have an open invitation to just invite anyone along. That does have its limitations in that you might, one, get the same people coming along that come along to everything, and therefore you don't get the same spread or variety of opinions and attitudes. So if you are going to do an open invitation, I would, in addition, personally encourage people to come along as well. So pick 3 or 4 people that you think, oh, actually, I'd really like them to come. I'm gonna encourage them to join the group. So yeah, just try and get a mix of people, not just people that agree with what you think, because as David says, you do get your eyes open to different ways of looking at things and to different things that are going on in your community that you might not know about. So yeah, that would be good to get a really good mix. We've talked a little bit about the course covering 6 months, which it allows plenty of time for thinking and praying and evaluation, and you can do it in a shorter length of time. I think I did it in about 4 months, but you know, it depends on how it fits with what you're doing and with your congregation. The thing I would try and do, which is a bit difficult if you're doing it over 6 months, is to avoid the school summer holidays, just because you can have a long gap between one session and the next, or you get people missing several of the sessions because they're away or they've got other commitments in the holidays. And linking into that as well, out of the 3 courses I delivered, 2 of them were in the evening. Again, it just depends what congregation you've got. If you've got people who work who you want to come along, then it's got to be in the evening really. One church, we did all their sessions in the daytime, but they didn't have anybody basically in the congregation who was still working, so that was fine. But do think about that, because again, it's bringing a different mix of people, those who work, those who don't, elderly, young, and that really helps. So the 4th thing is facilitation. So it's good to have one person who's bringing all this together and facilitating the session, because they can make sure the materials are ready and planning's there and that they've got everything they need. The other thing that I found was really helpful is if somebody was there to take notes and to just keep an eye on what was being said, because something that's said in session 1 that's really important and valuable can be lost by session 5 because no one's written it down or remembered what was said. So if you've got someone who can take some notes, take photographs of anything that you're producing, and just keep all that together in one place, and then bring that together to session 5, you can just remember all the discussions that you've had. And it also helps to draw out themes, because you can see if the same thing is being discussed over and over again. So for example, it might be children's work or something keeps coming up, so that's going to help you focus on that in the future, or talk to people in your community who are delivering children's work. So yeah, it's really helpful to have that. I didn't have that for one of my sessions, and it's quite difficult to facilitate and take notes and remember. So yeah, do that. The other thing is, if you've got people's permission, take photographs of what you're doing and of how things are progressing, because that's great to share with the congregation at the end. David was saying, you know, the tricky bit sometimes is moving from doing the course to actually making something happen afterwards. And if you've got lots of evidence and of what you've done and the materials and the things that you've created, that helps to sell it to the rest of the congregation. And linking with that is share your progress and what you're doing regularly with the congregation, whether that's just a note in the newsletter or a few words on a Sunday morning saying, this is what we've been doing, this is where we're up to now, we're looking forward to sharing with you our end results. It helps people to get on board with it and to support it and to feel involved, rather than a small group going through the whole course and then imposing it on the congregation at the end. So having a church leader involved and keeping the congregation on board and up to date with everything all the way through really helps. And it helps them to understand why you're doing it as well. So if you explain at the beginning, we're doing this course and this is why we're doing it, that's a good way. And you can display some of the things that you're doing in the services as well, if that helps. Lastly, what I found really helpful was to have a large scale map of your, if you're not a Church of England, then your area around your church. If you're a Church of England church, then your parish. So if you are Anglican, the communications team in your diocese can often produce an A3 map of your parish, which is fantastic. If not, you might have to do something with Google and get that printed yourself, pay to get that printed, or just use an OS map. It's just really helps to focus what you're doing, and you can stick post-its on it and write down where things are, and especially in the community engagement session that Simon was talking about. So if you can do that, that is a really, and it's a great physical thing that you can put up in front of the congregation or take a photograph of. So I think that's everything that I was going to say about practical hints and tips. So unless Simon or David have got anything they want to add.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Wendy. So helpful. So now we've got some time to answer some questions. So I can't see any that have come through while we've been talking, but you should be able to see a Q&A button somewhere on your screen. It's often at the bottom. If you click on that, you can just type your question in and then it will pop up and we can answer it. There are no stupid questions. Feel free to ask something. It might have already been covered, that's fine. We just want to answer anything that you might be wondering about, basically. I've got a couple of things while you do that and put your questions in. I've got a couple of things that I thought might come up, which I will preempt and ask. So one of them is, can you do this course if you're not an Anglican church? We've referred to parishes and patches and things. The answer to that is absolutely. The course was created by kind of more Anglican organisations, but it's suitable for anyone, whatever denomination you're in. We try not to refer to anything that's specifically Anglican in the course. It's using more ecumenical language. So absolutely. You can see some questions coming in now. So how often do you meet? If it takes 6 months, is that once a month? Perhaps Simon could answer that one.
You're on mute, as they always say. Yeah, I'd say about once a month makes sense. That's what we're roughly going for. Although we did discover the congregational survey takes a bit longer than we expected. So we went for about 5-6 weeks on that one. But I think, David, I need to compare notes. My instinct is the next task, just to go and do some online research, is quite short. So actually we might catch up our time back again and only have a 3-week gap next time. So we just try and keep it on schedule, not to hit into some of them, as Wendy rightly said. But monthly, that was about right. Monthly feels about right.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Simon. Another question here is, how does the facilitator process work? Do you provide a facilitator? So we have this network called the Together Network, and we have organisations in various parts of England. Now, if there is one in your area, it may well be that there's someone in that organisation who can help you, and we'd love to put you in touch with that organisation and see if they could do that for you. But if there's not, or if they're not able to, then it will be someone from within your church who will take on that role. Wendy, I wonder if you could speak to how you would pick a facilitator and who would make a good facilitator.
Yes, we did used to have it that we, the Together Network members, did all the facilitation, but if you've got a number of churches wanting to go through the process in your area, you just haven't got the resources all the time. So it's been created now by CUF so that the church can run it themselves, and that's a bit more sustainable. In terms of who should facilitate that, if you can have someone on from the church leadership team, that sometimes helps. You could bring somebody in who is associated with your church, connected with your church, but isn't directly involved, so they can be a bit neutral and objective. But yeah, I would say that probably someone who is connected to the church in some way, so they've got an idea of what happens there and where it is and geographically and all that sort of information.
Great, thank you. I've got one other question, which is if you're not in an Anglican church, so you don't have those parish boundaries, how would you recommend working out what actually is your parish? What does your area cover? How have people gone about doing that? That's to either Simon or Wendy.
Wendy can check in her comments. I'm sure it's got plenty going on. My instinct is you look at some natural boundaries. Big main roads are quite hard to cross. Naturally, people wouldn't naturally cross over big main roads. So think about main roads, areas of where housing stops and breaks out into woodland and into fields. Again, a natural change. Railway lines are notoriously cutting off at places. So just think about natural boundaries that people would naturally not come across to access your church area. So that's one way I do it. Right? Just try and look at the boundaries are naturally geographically. Census does give areas where you can actually identify census information by small area statistics. Some of them are a bit weird in terms of their boundaries. And I think it's because they try and get 1,500 people in each of those small area statistics. And they do some very strange, odd shapes to get 1,500 people into them. So I wouldn't just rely on the small area statistics of the census for that, because although it's good for getting information, they're not actually most natural in terms of where people will connect to. Yeah,
makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, someone's asked if it's possible to show an example of a session. So Simon's just going to try and share the facilitator's guide now.
So this is the facilitator's guide, which is what Wendy was saying about anybody can facilitate. So it gives an idea of what the structure looks like, how long you'll need, and the key themes. And this is really a helpful, useful way of breaking down each bit, what bits of prayer, which bit are sort of being taught, which feedback and case studies. So it's quite helpful to use those little colour codes at the bottom. And then the tips of what you've got to remember to bring with you to the session if you're facilitating it, which is really helpful for me if I'm running from one session to another, to make sure I've got a bag of those things together. So about a couple of days before, I'll say, actually, I need to make sure I get this, and this sorted out, and some practical tips. So there's there. And that's session 1. So that was the one about preparing people for prayer walking. So what are the objectives, what resources we need to get. And then there's just breaking it down time-wise, 5 minutes for the opening prayer, 5 minutes to explain what the session's about, and then 10 minutes getting people to talk to one another, share their experiences. Very interesting one we do at the beginning in terms of helping to get people to just share their hopes and fears about the area of what they're going to do. And then bits of instructions on how to do a flip chart exercise there, and then preparing for the next activity. What's the activity they've got to go and do, in this case with prayer walk. And so giving a bit of information about that, and a closing prayer. So even the prayer is provided for you in terms of the closing prayer. So this is, and so the activity sheets that we give out for participants, which again, Church Urban Funds produce all these resources. And this is just an example. Again, I'm talking about the prayer walk one. And this is one which will go out to participants rather than by facilitators. So they'd have some very clear, some guidance on in this particular case, how to carry out a prayer walk, some practical guidance and tips about how to do that. And some of the things they might want to look for. So the participant guide gives some very clear, see there's one which is provided for those who are coming, and one that's provided for those who are behind the scenes reading it through. So it's very well put together by Church Urban Fund. It's got all the resources that you need if you wanted to run the course yourselves or to get somebody in.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful to see. Someone's just asked another question. Is there a cost involved in receiving the resources? No, it's completely free. So I'll explain in just a second how you can get hold of them. But they are from Church Urban Fund, and they are free. And also we'd love to support you however we can as you go about doing the course. You can always reach out to us. Okay, so just to wrap up, firstly, massive thank you to Simon and to Wendy and to David for running the session this morning. And as we mentioned before, we will send around a recording of the session today. It will be emailed to you if you've signed up via the Eventbrite link. It will be emailed to you, and we'll send you around a link to a little booklet, which is kind of a preview, an overview of the course, which you could find useful to share with other people in your church and say, hey, look at this. And this is the kind of thing we were talking about this morning. And then if you'd like to receive the full course, which, as I said, is completely free, you just need to send us an email to this email address here that's on the screen, which is hello@cuf.org.uk. And we'll also email that email address to you when we send you the recording, so you can come back to us and say, yes, I'd like to have a look at the full course. Otherwise, all that's left to say is thank you so much for coming and giving up a bit of your time this morning to come and hear from us, and have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye, everyone.